Press your lips together right now. Go ahead, just for a second. That thing you just did, that simple, automatic, muscle memory movement that takes less than a second and requires almost no conscious thought is one of the strangest things your species does, and you've never once questioned it. You've done it thousands of times, to people you love, to people you wanted to love, to the top of a child's head in a dark hallway at 2 in the morning, to a hand, to a cheek, to a forehead. You've seen it in every movie, every painting, every sculpture, every culture you've ever encountered, and it has never once occurred to you to ask the question that should have been obvious from the very beginning. Why? Why do humans press their faces together? Not metaphorically, not romantically, literally. 2 humans, 2 faces, lips making contact. Why is that the thing? Why did that specific behavior become the universal symbol of love, affection, greeting, and desire across virtually every human civilization that has ever existed? Because here's what nobody tells you. We don't actually know for certain where kissing comes from. Not completely. And the theories that do exist are stranger, older, and more unsettling than anything you've been told. Let's start with the uncomfortable biological reality. Kissing, from a pure survival standpoint, makes no sense. Think about it for exactly 1 second with your rational brain switched on. You are pressing a warm, moist opening in your face, an opening that leads directly into your digestive and respiratory systems, against the warm, moist facial opening of another organism. You are exchanging saliva. You are sharing bacteria. A single kiss transfers somewhere between 10 million and 1 billion bacteria between 2 people. 1 billion. And the human species decided this was romantic. Evolution is ruthless. It eliminates behaviors that hurt survival and preserves behaviors that help it. So the fact that kissing survived, that it didn't get selected out over hundreds of thousands of years, means one of 2 things. Either kissing is more beneficial than it looks, or it's so deeply embedded in human wiring that the cost doesn't outweigh the psychological benefit. Or both. The answer, it turns out, is both. But to understand why, you have to go back much further than you think. Further than ancient Rome, further than the earliest written records, further even than Homo sapiens. You have to go back to a behavior that predates the human species entirely. Here's something that will permanently change how you think about kissing. We are not the only animals that do it, or something like it. Bonobos, our closest living relatives alongside chimpanzees, kiss with their mouths open. They use kissing as a greeting, as a conflict resolution tool, as a social bonding mechanism. When 2 bonobos who have been separated reunite, they kiss. When tension breaks out in a group, kissing is one of the primary ways it gets resolved. When a bonobo wants to establish trust with another bonobo, it kisses. Chimpanzees do it too, though less frequently and with less variety. They press their lips together in moments of reassurance, comfort, and reconciliation. Elephants entwine their trunks, which serves a similar sensory and social function. Dogs lick faces. Horses nuzzle muzzles. Now, this doesn't mean animals kiss the way humans do. The complexity, the cultural weight, the romantic dimension, that's distinctly human. But it does mean the underlying impulse. The drive to make facial contact with another individual as an act of connection and communication. That impulse is ancient, pre-human ancient. It predates the first stone tool. It predates fire. It predates every other piece of behavior we think of as distinctly ours. Which raises an interesting question. If the behavior is that old, what was it originally for? The leading hypothesis among evolutionary biologists is something called the neuroendocrine regulation theory, which sounds like something from a textbook you'd be forced to read at university. So let me translate it into something you can actually feel. When 2 people kiss, especially in the early stages of attraction, the body does something extraordinary. Cortisol levels, your primary stress hormone, drop measurably. Serotonin fluctuates in ways associated with early-stage romantic attachment. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, floods the system. Dopamine fires. Your heart rate changes. Your pupils dilate slightly. Your nervous system is running a full-body chemical assessment of the person in front of you, and it's doing it through your lips. Because lips are extraordinary sensory organs. They contain more sensory nerve endings per square centimeter than almost anywhere else on the human body, including your fingertips. The area of the brain that processes sensation from the lips is disproportionately large relative to the actual physical size of the lips themselves. Your brain dedicates enormous neural real estate to information coming from your mouth. This means that when your lips make contact with another person, you are gathering more sensory data about that person than you could from almost any other form of physical contact. And here's the part that most people have never heard. That data includes chemical information. Saliva contains trace amounts of sex hormones, including testosterone. During a kiss, particularly an open mouth kiss, those hormones can be detected by the mucous membranes of the mouth and nose. There's evidence suggesting that women, in particular, are unconsciously evaluating hormonal compatibility during kissing, reading biological signals about genetic fitness, immune system diversity, and reproductive compatibility, all through a behavior that most people describe as simply feeling good. The kiss, at its most ancient and fundamental level, may be a biological test, a deeply pleasurable one, but a test nonetheless. Now, here's where it gets genuinely complicated, because not every culture on Earth kisses romantically. And this fact tends to shock people who've grown up in societies where kissing feels as natural and universal as breathing. When European explorers reached certain populations in Asia, Oceania, and the Americas in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, they encountered people who did not kiss on the lips as a romantic or affectionate practice. Some groups touched noses instead. Some pressed foreheads together. Some inhaled near the cheek or neck of the person they were greeting or expressing affection toward. The anthropologist Von Bryant spent decades cataloging kissing practices across cultures. His research found that romantic lip kissing, the kind you see in every Hollywood film, was absent or rare in a significant number of the cultures he documented. A 2015 study published in the American Anthropologist Journal examined 168 cultures and found that fewer than half, only 46%, practiced romantic lip kissing as a recognized cultural norm. Fewer than half. This is a profound finding, and it doesn't get nearly the attention it deserves. If kissing were purely biological, purely hardwired, purely instinctive, you'd expect it to appear in every human culture independently, the way language appears in every human culture, the way music appears in every human culture. The fact that it doesn't suggest something more complicated. It suggests that while the underlying impulse, the drive toward facial closeness and oral contact, may be biological, the specific form kissing takes, lips to lips, romantically coded, culturally loaded, is at least partly learned behavior. Which means somewhere in human history, somebody invented it, or discovered it, and that discovery spread. So where did lip kissing as a cultural practice actually begin? This is where the historical record gets involved, and the historical record is, as it often is, surprisingly specific and also maddeningly incomplete. The oldest written reference to something resembling kissing appears in ancient Indian texts called the Vedas, specifically around 1500 BC. These texts describe people pressing their noses together and sniffing, a practice that sounds more like what modern researchers would call a nuzzle than what we'd call a kiss. But what's significant is the intimacy of facial contact, the nose-to-face proximity, the deliberate sensory engagement. Then, around 900 BC, other Sanskrit texts appear that describe lip contact more explicitly. The Mahabharata, one of the oldest epic narratives in human history, contains references to kissing on the lips as an act of affection. The Kama Sutra, compiled somewhere between 400 BC and 200 AD, devotes an entire section to the classification of kisses. It lists types, techniques, contexts, the appropriate times to kiss, and the inappropriate ones. The ancient Indians were not inventing kissing when they wrote these texts. They were codifying something that already had enough cultural weight and complexity to require a taxonomy. They were writing the manual for something their civilization already knew. Ancient Mesopotamia has clay tablets dating back over 4,500 years that reference kissing in both romantic and ritual contexts. Ancient Egypt has wall carvings and papyrus illustrations showing people in close facial proximity that scholars interpret as kissing, though interpretation of ancient visual art is always delicate and contested. The ancient Greeks kissed extensively. They had different words for different types of kisses, which tells you the behavior was sufficiently complex and culturally significant to require linguistic distinction. Philema, a kiss of affection. Basium, which the Romans borrowed and expanded. The Romans, who were prolific kissers by ancient standards, kissed their family members on the lips as greeting, kissed the hands and feet of their emperors, and kissed in religious ceremonies. In the Roman world, your kissing behavior actually communicated your social position. Aristocrats kissed on the lips. People of middle status kissed on the cheeks. Lower status individuals kissed on the hands or feet. The hierarchy of the kiss was the hierarchy of society, written on the body. There's something both fascinating and slightly disturbing about a civilization that turned an intimate physical act into a class system. But it tells you something important. By the time Rome was at its height, kissing wasn't just a biological behavior. It was a social technology. It carried information, communicated status, sealed agreements, expressed reverence. It had been layered with meaning in the way that only behaviors, which have been around for a very, very long time, get layered with meaning. But here's the question that should be sitting at the back of your mind. All of this is recorded history. All of this is texts and carvings and clay tablets. The earliest of these takes us back maybe 4,000 to 4,500 years. Homo sapiens have been around for 300,000 years. What were humans doing with their lips for the other 295,000 years? This is where we have to move from archaeology into anthropology, from what we can prove into what we can reasonably infer from the evidence we have. And there is one theory about the prehistoric origin of kissing that is simultaneously the most logical and the most viscerally startling thing I can tell you. It's called premastication. And once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. Before the invention of tools, before the development of agriculture, before anything we'd recognize as food preparation, infant humans faced a very specific problem. They couldn't eat solid food. Babies don't have teeth. They can't chew. And for most of human evolutionary history, there was no blender, no food processor, no way to mechanically prepare soft food for an infant beyond one method. A mother, or caregiver, would chew food themselves, partially break it down, soften it, mix it with saliva, and then transfer it directly from their mouth to the mouth of the infant. Mouth to mouth, lips to lips. This practice is called premastication, and it was almost certainly universal in pre-agricultural human populations. It's not a fringe theory. It's documented in human populations across Africa, Asia, the Pacific, and the Americas well into the modern era. It's practiced in some communities today. Scientists studying early human infant feeding patterns consider premastication a near-certain feature of prehistoric childcare. Now think about what that means neurologically. Infants who received food this way would associate mouth-to-mouth contact with safety, warmth, nourishment, the presence of the most important person in their world. That association would be encoded at a fundamental level, wired into the deepest circuitry of emotional memory, long before language existed to describe it. The mouth-to-mouth transfer would become a trigger for comfort, connection, love. In other words, the kiss may not have begun as romance. It may have begun as lunch. And then evolution did what evolution does. It took a behavior that was already neurologically loaded, already associated with attachment and care and safety, and it found other uses for it. The infant who grew into an adult still carried those neural associations. The mouth-to-mouth contact that meant mother, safety, nourishment became mouth-to-mouth contact that meant partner, bond, desire. The same gesture. Completely transformed meaning. Hundreds of thousands of years of drift between the two. There's another angle to this story that doesn't get enough attention, and it has to do with smell. The human nose is dramatically underestimated. We are a visual species. We trust our eyes. We organize our world by what we see. But smell is the oldest sense. It connects directly to the limbic system, the most ancient part of the brain, bypassing the rational cortex entirely. Smell triggers memory and emotion faster and more powerfully than any other sensory input. You can hear a song from your childhood and feel nostalgic, but you can smell something from your childhood and be there, actually transported, in a way that vision and sound can't replicate. And here's what's critical about kissing and smell. When you bring your face close to another person's face, close enough to kiss, you are also close enough to smell them. Not their perfume, not their soap, them. Their biological scent, which carries information about their immune system, their hormonal state, their genetic compatibility with you, their stress levels, their health. The science of this is not speculative. Researchers have documented that women, across multiple studies, rate men's body odor as more attractive when those men have immune system genes that are meaningfully different from their own. Genetic diversity in immune systems produces offspring with broader disease resistance, and female humans appear to be able to detect this diversity chemically, unconsciously, through smell. When you're close enough to kiss someone, you're close enough to run this assessment, which raises the genuinely interesting possibility that the approach of kissing, the moment of closing distance, the pause just before lips meet, may carry as much biological information as the kiss itself. The anticipation isn't just romantic, it's evaluative. Your nose knows things your conscious mind hasn't figured out yet. Let's talk about what kissing does to the brain, because this part of the story is as strange as any of the prehistoric theories. Researchers at Oxford University, among others, have studied the neurological effects of kissing in detail. What they found reframes the entire behavior. Kissing activates 5 of your 12 cranial nerves simultaneously. It engages motor pathways, sensory pathways, the autonomic nervous system. It triggers the release of oxytocin, the same hormone released during childbirth and breastfeeding that creates the fierce, almost irrational bond between a mother and a newborn infant. It spikes dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward, motivation, and the drive to repeat pleasurable behaviors. It releases endorphins, your brain's natural pain relief and euphoria system. Kissing, neurologically, is not a simple thing. It is a complex, multi-system neurological event that your brain has been specifically wired to find rewarding. And the brain doesn't wire itself to find things rewarding by accident. Dopamine is released in response to things that help you survive and reproduce. Food releases dopamine. Sex releases dopamine. Social connection releases dopamine. The fact that kissing releases dopamine as powerfully as it does suggests that at some point in evolutionary history, kissing, or the behaviors that preceded it, became associated with outcomes that actually mattered for survival. The reward exists because the behavior earned it. Over hundreds of thousands of years of human experience, mouth-to-mouth contact meant something important enough to your survival that your brain started paying you to do it. Here's something that rarely comes up in this conversation. Kissing as power. Throughout recorded history, the kiss has been used not just as affection, but as a mechanism of submission, authority, and social control. In medieval Europe, kissing the ring of a bishop or the hand of a noble was a ritual acknowledgement of hierarchy. You were not expressing affection. You were expressing subordination. The person being kissed was absorbing that acknowledgement, ritually receiving your deference, having their authority physically affirmed. The Pope's ring, the king's hand, the feudal lord's cheek. These were not intimate moments. They were public performances of power, using the vocabulary of intimacy to do something entirely different. The same gesture, completely different function. And this is what makes kissing so unusual among human behaviors. Almost no other physical act carries such radically different meanings depending on context. A fist can mean anger or celebration, but the range is limited. Kissing can mean romantic love, parental devotion, religious reverence, social submission, political alliance, and greeting between strangers, all using the same basic motion. That range of meaning, that semantic flexibility, is the hallmark of a behavior that has been around long enough to accumulate centuries of layered cultural use. It is, in the most literal sense, ancient vocabulary. Now let's arrive at something uncomfortable. Kissing spreads disease. Not theoretically. Actually, measurably. Significantly. Mononucleosis, called the kissing disease, is caused by the Epstein-Barr virus and spreads almost exclusively through saliva. Herpes simplex type 1 is transmitted through oral contact and infects roughly 2/3 of the global population under 50, most of whom were first exposed through a childhood kiss from an infected family member. Meningococcal meningitis can spread through saliva. Streptococcal infections spread through saliva. Even some strains of influenza. This is not a minor footnote. This is the biological reality of what kissing involves. And the fact that the human species continued kissing despite these costs, despite the bacterial transfer, despite the viral transmission risk, tells you something about the depth of the drive. Evolution is not sentimental. If the costs of kissing reliably outweighed the benefits, the behavior would have been selected against. Individuals who didn't kiss would have survived more often, reproduced more successfully, and kissing would have gradually disappeared from the behavioral repertoire. It didn't disappear, which means the benefits, the bonding hormones, the partner assessment, the social cohesion, the neurological reward outweighed the disease risk across hundreds of thousands of years of human experience. The kiss survived its own biology. So here's what we actually know. The impulse toward facial contact, toward closeness, toward mouth-to-mouth connection is at minimum as old as our primate lineage. It is older than our species. It predates every civilization, every language, every written text by an almost incomprehensible margin. The specific form it takes, the cultural coding around it, the romantic meaning we assign it, that appears to have crystallized somewhere in the ancient world, possibly South Asia, possibly earlier, and spread outward through trade, migration, and contact between cultures over thousands of years. The oldest written celebrations of kissing come from India. The oldest depictions of people in close facial contact appear in cultures with strong connections to those early South Asian civilizations. As empires rose and trade routes expanded, the kiss traveled with them. The Greeks who encountered it spread it west. The Romans codified it and institutionalized it. The Christian Church, despite its complicated relationship with physical intimacy, embedded the kiss into its rituals, the kiss of peace, and sent it across Europe. By the time the modern era began, romantic lip kissing had become so dominant in Western culture that it was invisible, assumed, taken for granted, the default expression of love. But it was never that simple. It was never just one thing. Let's take a step back and look at the full picture. Kissing is ancient animal behavior repurposed by a species intelligent enough to layer it with meaning. It started, most likely, as a proximity behavior, getting close enough to smell, to assess, to evaluate. It was reinforced by premastication, by the mouth-to-mouth transfer of food from parent to child, which embedded it in the deepest neural circuitry of safety and attachment. It was shaped by the neurological reward system of a social primate species that needed deep bonds to survive. And then it was picked up by culture, by ritual, by religion, by art, by language, and transformed into something vast. Every culture that kisses brought something different to it. The Romans made it hierarchical. Medieval Christians made it sacred. The ancient Indians made it into an art form complex enough to require a written manual. The modern West turned it into the cinematic shorthand for love itself, the moment in 10,000 films where the music swells and the world narrows to two faces and the space between them. All of that cultural elaboration, all of that meaning, all of that weight, built on top of something an ancient primate did to get close enough to smell another ancient primate, and found the closeness itself rewarding. That's the origin story. It's not especially romantic, in the way that most origin stories aren't. But there's something that moves me about it nonetheless. Because what it says is that the drive to be close, the drive to reduce distance between yourself and the person you love, to press the most sensitive part of your face against another living creature and stay there for a moment, that drive is not invented. It is not culturally constructed. It is not something that civilization taught you. It is something that was already there, wired in, written into the oldest parts of what you are: fire, smoke, breath. The oldest humans sat around fires and breathed the same smoky air you'd smell at a bonfire tonight. Some of them, at some point, pressed their faces close to each other in the dark and found the closeness itself a kind of relief. They couldn't have told you why. They didn't need to. The why was already handled, deep down, in the biology, in the reward, in the rush of warmth that followed. They passed that impulse down to their children, and their children's children, and eventually to the Vedic priests writing it into sacred texts, and the Roman emperors receiving kisses on their hands, and the bonobos in the forest doing what bonobos do, and every person who has ever leaned toward another person across a table or a campfire or a car seat in that particular kind of silence that only exists just before lips touch. You have been kissing your whole life. Your species has been doing it for longer than civilization has existed. And now you know why.